Okay, let's get started on Unit 4, Sensation and Perception. I think you'll find this unit somewhat interesting. This is all about how we process information and how different things affect the way we view. We all see the same thing, but the way we perceive it is where we differ. A couple of basic things to start off with. Sensation is the stimulation of sensory receptors and the transmission of sensory information to the central nervous system. In other words, it's an automatic process, happens the same in everybody. You're hearing my voice, all of you are, so everybody is taking that in the same way. Now what your brain does with it is where we differ. The stimulation of the senses is automatic with the presence of some source of energy, whether it be vibrations, whether it be electromagnetic energy. It could be any sort of thing. It could be chemicals, it could be just about anything, but any source of energy is going to produce some stimulation of some sense organ that you have. Perception is the process, the psychological process, through which we interpret the sensory stimulation. Perception is where we differ. Sensation is same to all of us, but how we perceive that is where we differ. This perception reflects our learning, our expectations, and our attitudes. We see different things. We see the same thing every day, but some days it looks different to us because of what we've learned since then, maybe our expectation, maybe the attitude we're in at the time. For example, if we take this can of soup here, it's a can of soup. I mean, it's a painting of a can of soup. It's really nothing that fancy, but to me, I'm not very intelligent as far as the art world goes, but that was done by Andy Warhol. That painting is worth millions of dollars. To me, it's a can of soup. I just don't get it. We see the same thing, but the way we perceive it is what's different. Hopefully you understand the difference there. All right, stimulation of the senses and the way they're interpreted are affected by a couple of different concepts. One of these concepts is called the absolute threshold. It's the weakest amount of stimulus that can be sensed. It's the weakest amount of any of our 5 key senses that we can possibly pick up on. Animals have got different thresholds than humans. Some animals can see really well. A hawk can sit on top of a telephone post and see little mice running around down the field way below. That's impressive. We can't do that. A bird can stand in one spot and feel the worms underneath him. His sensation in his feet have got to be really, really sensitive. Of course, all different animals have their key senses that they use. They've determined these thresholds for humans in general, but we each vary slightly. Some of us can see better than others. Some of us can smell better than others. Some of us have developed a really keen sense of taste. We need them to be low, but not too low to overload our brain. If you're sitting in class, it would drive you crazy to hear all of the pencils in class. If everybody's taking notes, if you could hear everybody else's pencils scratching against those paper, it would truly overload your brain. So if we got it just better and better and better, it would be too much. I know that pilots that are training for the Air Force, they don't want you better than like 20/20. You could be a little bit better, but if you get too good or you see too much, you overload your brain. The cockpit is designed for somebody who can only see so much. So if you've got like 20/13 vision, then that's too good. You're going to overload and you won't be as effective as a pilot. Now this is a list of different absolute thresholds. For vision, now this sounds a little hard to believe, but a candle 30 miles away on a dark night. So if you went down to like Table Rock Lake and you found 2 mountaintops 30 miles apart, somebody lit a candle, you'd say, yep, I see that light. That's vision. For hearing, a watch 20 feet away in a quiet room, that's probably like a pocket watch, not a regular wristwatch nowadays. For taste, it's a teaspoon of sugar and 2 gallons of water. For smell, it's a drop of perfume in a small apartment. And for touch, it's a bee's wing dropped on your cheek from about a centimeter away. Now, how they determined that, I don't know how many bees were killed in coming up with that, but that's the only thing they could think of for touch. So, and these are a little dated, but generally this is what most people agreed on. All right. Another type of concept that affects us, our perception, is difference threshold. It's the minimum amount of difference that can be detected between two stimuli. In other words, let's say that we went, I said, okay, tomorrow bring in some green paint. In a regular classroom, I might end up with 30 different kinds of green paint. There are tons of different types. You know, you've all been to the store and you see all the paint chips that vary oh so slightly. Now, next to each other, we can tell the difference, but if somebody showed us one and then 5 minutes later showed the one that was right next to it, would we really be able to tell that was the difference? Now, people that do that for a living, that deal with paint and are interior decorators and people who do kind of stuff like that, they can tell a difference. They have a very small difference threshold. The average person just says, "Oh, that's that's the same color." The same with different types of wine. Somebody can taste wine and say, "Yep." They can even give you the year and where it was made. I mean, that's pretty impressive. They have a very small difference threshold. The rest, everybody else would go, "Yep, that's wine." So, and they can do the same with smell. You know, all these people can, really fine-tune this threshold. So it's pretty impressive. Sensory adaptation is another concept, the process by which we become more sensitive to weak stimuli and less sensitive to unchanged stimuli. In other words, you get used to a particular stimuli. You come in late to a movie, so you go in there and it's completely black. You can't see a thing. And then you sit around for a few seconds, or would stand there for a few seconds, and pretty soon you can see, and you can find yourself a seat. If you have been in sports and you've had to wrap an ankle or tape an ankle, get it taped up, it feels really tight. 5 minutes into the game, you don't feel it at all. Or you girls, this sounds a little bit crazy, but every morning you put that bra on, it's got to feel uncomfortable in the morning, but after a few minutes, you don't feel it anymore. We've totally adapted to that sensation. Or even when you jump into a pool. Every summer you go through the same thing. You jump into the pool, people stand there and kind of jump around for a few seconds. It's cold, it's cold, it's cold. After a few minutes, you don't feel it anymore. Another concept is the signal detection theory, method of distinguishing between stimuli based on your settings as well as your physical state, your mood, your attitude. You know, we see the same people almost every day, but if something happened overnight, you heard something about somebody, maybe you had some kind of fight with them, the next time you see them, your perception of them is completely different. Maybe you heard, you got a kid in your class, you think, man, that kid's all right. And that night you heard he cheated on all these tests and he's not that great. The next time you see him, you have a totally different view of that person. That's your signal detection theory. This painting, for example, we don't really know what that is. And it looks like some little kid drew it. But when an expert looks at that, they look at it and go, oh my gosh, this kid needs some help. You can see there are people on the right side that they're being shot in the head. There are police on the left-hand side. There's a coffin there in the middle. I mean, this kid has had a really, really bad upbringing and probably needs some type of therapy. He's, his trailer's on fire. It's not a good scene at all. But the average person goes, yeah, it looks just like some kid's scribble. So, kind of an interesting picture. To understand how all these things, we have to go through the different senses. Now, some of this you've had in biology, so that you can probably blow through this pretty quick. So for vision, you need to understand how light works. Light is actually electromagnetic energy. The light is visible to human only makes up a small part of this electromagnetic spectrum. Ultraviolet waves are on the short end of the spectrum, just beyond what we can see, and radio waves are on the long end of the spectrum, just beyond what we can see on that end. Visible light falls in between ultraviolet and radio. The visible spectrum, as you may know, is broken down into several different colors, and the acronym is Roy G. Biv. I'm sure you've seen that before: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. All right, so let's look at how the eye actually works. It's very similar to a camera. The light enters through your pupil, which is projected onto a surface on the back of your eye. That pupil is allowed in. If you're in a dark room, your pupil's nice and wide. If you're in a very bright room, your pupil's very small. When people drink a lot or they do a lot of drugs, those pupils become wide open. That's why if you see somebody who's a big stoner, they're always squinting because their pupils are not working correctly and they're trying to limit the amount of eye using their eyelids rather than their pupils. The size of the pupil adjusts automatically, like I just said, and they're also sensitive to our emotions. You know, people that are really scared, your brain is trying to take in as much as you possibly can, so that it's opening those pupils as wide as they can to perceive as much as they can. So people actually are wide-eyed with fear. There's a picture of the eye. As you can see, it goes to the pupil there, then it hits that lens, and then it goes to the retina, which is on the back of the eyeball. That lens adjusts its thickness by using those muscles on either side of it. You can either pull them apart or push them together to make the lens nice and thick. When you squint, what you're doing is using the muscles around the eye because the lens is at its maximum thickness. So when you use it around the eye, you're elongating the eye to give it a different projected image on the back of the retina. Now that retina is a sensitive surface of the eye that acts like the film of a camera. It takes in everything that you see. It's coated with these light-sensitive neurons called photoceptors. And once that light hits these nerves, the optic nerve will carry that visual input to the occipital lobe of the brain, as we discussed in the last chapter. Now, everybody has a blind spot. Where that optic nerve leaves the eye, it's due to a lack of photoceptors because there are no photoceptors at that one particular point. Now, you can't see it if you hold your finger out in front of you and then stay looking forward and move your finger to the side. You always see that finger. That's because your brain knows at the end of that hand there's a finger. You're too smart for your own good. Mr. Farquhar in his anatomy classes uses a little thing where they have two lines on a piece of paper, and as it gets closer to you, one line will disappear. There are two types of these photoceptors. You have rods and cones. Rods are to enable you to see black and white, and your cones, of course, provide your color vision. The sharpness of your vision is called your visual acuity. In other words, how well you see. It's measured with something called a Snellen chart. The Snellen chart looks like you've seen in many a doctor's office or even an optometrist if you've got glasses and you've seen an optometrist before. That's called a Snellen chart. It's been around for years. The way this works is if you've got 2100 vision, which means your vision's not that good, you have to stand 20 feet away from something in order for somebody that has 20/20, they can stand 100 feet away and you'll see the same thing. So if mine's 20/40, somebody with 20/20 vision can stand 40 feet away and I'll see what they see from 20 feet away. Hopefully that makes sense to you. You'd be nearsighted. All right, when a color wheel is formed, the colors across from each other are called complementary colors. I'm sorry you can't really read that. If it cut off, I apologize. But the colors across from each other are called complementary colors, and when you put these two colors together, you form gray. Now, keep these in mind, this is not pigments. If you have an art class, you're like, that doesn't work, Busby. That's not going to give you the right color. But when lights are mixed like that, that's what gives you the gray. So red and green are opposite each other, so you put those two lights together, and you will get gray. Don't confuse these lights with pigments, which reflect light. It's a little different. The cones in the eye are sensitive to either blue, green, or red. They either pick up one of those three colors. That's how it works. They mix, you get different colors by mixing different amounts of these particular cones, these three colors. An old television set works like that. That board that is in the middle of the commons area, there are only three different color LEDs on there. If you get close to it, you can see that, and a combination of those will give you all those different colors. Now when you stare at one for a long time, you get an after image. You stare at the color for a long time, and then all of a sudden it disappears. You get the complement of the color you were just looking at. When we start the next one of these lectures, I will give you an example of that.